Welcome back to the Strength and Speed podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner and Conquer the Gauntlet Pro, Evan Preparis. Joining me, I have another member of Strength and Speed and a guest. But first, my co-host for this episode is Gary Shaw. Gary, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
And if you're unfamiliar with Gary, we actually talked about him in the last episode. He once held the record for 24 beers, 24 miles in under 24 hours for about a week before it got beaten. Also a ultra runner, also the race director of the Leaky Hourglass Ultra Marathon, which is a last man standing event where the time keeps getting shorter, which we'll plug at the end for you there, Gary.
Thanks.
Before we get to our guests, so this episode is brought to you by Exoskin. If you're not familiar with Exoskin, they're compression garments. They make socks, compression shorts. They make compression shirts, compression leggings, and they also make underwear, so Exo underwear, which is one of their newer products. And our guest on today's episode is the reason we have him as a guest is because of Exoskin. So nice connection made through there. And he is one of the best ultra runners, I'm going to say, ever, right? So huge accomplishments. I'm going to cover some of his career highlights, and then we will bring him on and introduce him. So joining us, we have John Kelly. So first to complete the Grand Round, the UK's three fell running records, biking between them. 2017 Barkely Marathons winner, so the race that Easter Young, everyone's kind of familiar with that one, and becoming the 15th person to finish the race in 30 years. Broke the 31-year-old record on the Pennine Way. 2020 Spine winner, two-time Ironman age group champion, 2018 Boulder, 2018 Mont Tremblant, 2018 ITU long course age group world champion. I mean, the list just goes on, and this is just like the very, very top highlights, right? Guinness World Record for fastest marathon dressed as a video game character at the 2016 Boston Marathon. And this is probably my favorite record he has as his career highlights. It's slowest swim ever in a sub 9-hour marathon at the 2018 Ironman Arizona. So we have John Kelly. So John, welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, that's in a sub 9 Ironman. That's one of my prouder moments. I've got that by a solid 3 minutes. I swam about a 1:17 in that race, and I think the next slowest ever is 1:14. So it's a pretty sizable gap there I've got for that one. I'm pretty confident of hanging onto it for a while.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, just a huge. I mean, I'm looking at your website, randomforestrunner.com, and you look at the results page, and it's just like, list after list of just these like massive races, these massive physical undertakings with impressive accomplishments, right? So, just pretty cool to see.
Thanks. Yeah, it's made some fun adventures. I generally excel the longer and the more technical and the more miserable that things are in general. So whether I'm actually winning by skill or just winning by attrition, I think that it's tough to tell on that one.
Well, you're in good company here.
But yeah, it's been good to hear.
Yeah, I was going to say you're in good company here because Gary is also does ultra, a lot of stuff that's really stupid long and painful, including like the drinking thing I mentioned earlier. And then I do ultra distance obstacle course racing. So, races that are 5 to 24 hours in length with since you're running plus obstacles, right? Some monkey bars and all sorts of nonsense mixed in there. So let's kind of start at the beginning because I
was going to say I might need to get a few tips from Gary at some point. One of my plans here before I leave the UK, there's this trail that was designed to connect 6 pubs around the local hills here. It's about 48 miles long, and so sometime before I leave, I plan on doing that as an actual literal pub crawl. Doing the 48-mile run, getting all of my sustenance from the pubs along the way, drinking a pint at each one. It'll be a good time, good company, good send-off to the UK to whenever my time here ends.
The key is definitely being able to burp, John. You have to be able to off gas and make room for more, or otherwise you can either burp or vomit. Those are your two options.
I'm pretty talented at both of those. So it's one of my more dubious skills. I think I've definitely been known to lose it at a few races, some of the hard runs that I've done.
Nice. Because some of our listeners may not know you too well, because like I said, we're mostly an obstacle course racing focus, but obstacle course racing is a new sport, but fitness is old, so we pull in athletes from other sports to steal their lessons learned because they've already solved the problems that we're looking for. So let's start off with, how did you get into running, and then more specifically, like, fall down this slippery slope of like some of the arguably stupidest / hardest marathons and races like ever?
So I ran cross country and track in high school, and after that I essentially took a solid decade off in college and grad school, and kind of went the intramural sport circuit with softball and flag football. And at the end of all of that, I decided I wanted to see what I could do in a marathon. I'd always felt that I did better the longer things got. So it kind of seemed like the natural thing for me to try while I could still do it. So I signed up for one. I had never raced longer than a 10K, but just kind of went for it, and it didn't go very well. So I said, I think I can do better at that. And so I did a bit better, and then I did another one and did a bit better again, and things kind of kept progressing. And then I said, okay, well, what if I add in biking and swimming? Or what if I go longer and go on the trails? And just kind of kept exploring and gradually expanding the scope of what I was doing and what I was challenging myself with, and found that I was enjoying those adventures, and was doing a fairly good job at them as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's an understatement. So what I do like about your, again, I would check out his results page on his randomforestrunner.com, because it is interesting to see, like, you have a marathon 2013, and then another one 14, and another one later in 14. You can see like these huge chunks of time being taken away every time you run again. And then starting in 2015, you started doing Barkely's marathons. So I know our audience loves to talk about Barkleys. So why did you first decide to do that? And then how did that first one go?
So I've got quite the personal connection to Barkely, and actually grew up right next to the course. My family's lived on farmland there for 200 years, out in the middle of nowhere, next to Frozen Head State Park, where the race takes place. And so I had that deep personal connection to the land and to the race, and really wanted to get out there and prove myself on my home turf, and in front of my own local community, who for the most part doesn't know much about ultra running. As most people don't. So.
Right.
It was a great opportunity, and so went out there that first year in 2015, and got a fun run, which is 3 of the 5 loops, before I was kind of done in by stomach issues and poor food selection. I was still pretty new to ultra running that point at myself, and kind of thought, I'll just have sports bars and gels the entire time. And after 30 plus hours of nothing but engineered sugar products, your stomach kind of says, nope, no thank you. Returned the following year. I managed to get 4 loops and start my 5th and final loop before kind of falling asleep on the side of the trail there, and returned the following year in my 3rd attempt in 2017. Still to this point, the most recent finish of the race. Hopefully we'll see that change next year.
Yeah. So I remember I was getting ready for a 24-hour OCR that weekend, I believe, in the year you finished. And I remember being excited and like seeing the results when that went off. Actually, I know what that is. That was terrain relay 24-hour. That's what that weekend was. So I remember being super excited at the results from that, and one, being excited that anyone finished, and then two, you were or still are sponsored by Hammer Nutrition. Is that right?
Yeah, I was at the time. They still have a great relationship with them and still use a lot of their products. But as I've kind of gone into the multi-day adventure route, I've had to place a large focus on real food along the way as well, where I'm shoving pizza and everything else in my mouth. So that's not my sole fueling focus anymore at this point. But yeah, I've had a long relationship with them and big believer in their products.
Yeah, so I'm still sponsored by Hammer, and I have been since 2015, and I remember being like, oh, that's super cool that like another Hammer Nutrition athlete finished Barkleys, and I was really excited for that. So just something cool to hear. And you mentioned it briefly, but talk about, as you transition from marathon to these multi-day events, what does your nutrition look like as over the different distances, and when do you start using real foods, or do you use real foods the whole time, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's quite different over those distances, and you're dealing with meal replacement at that point, where you're going for multiple days at a time, and you need some real food. You need something with a bit of protein to it. Sports nutrition products at that point. So I've found it's extremely important to have a large variety available, things that have worked for you in the past, but still a number of options, because you never know at the end of these, or what your body is suddenly going to start despising. And in general, your body is also very good at craving what it's deficient of. So if it needs more salt, if it needs something savory with a bit of protein, it's very good at giving you those signals if you're willing and able to listen. So that's again just diversity. Something salt, something sweet, something savory, available at all times.
So personally, what do you personally eat during a multi-day event? Like, what are some of the typical food types that you're consuming?
So I do have an actual spreadsheet of U.S. and U.K. foods that have the calorie numbers and everything on them, that has a pretty big selection of kind of pre-packaged foods, also homemade treats, that flapjacks and cookies and whatnot. But my big go-to always has been, for something that's kind of hearty and filling, has always been pizza. And it's one of those things that I probably have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to thank in those video games. I feel like every time I walk by a pizza, and just kind of tag it and get a power up, get going back there.
Nice. The distances you've covered have been, some insane distances. What does a normal training week kind of look like for you when getting ready for a major race?
So it's not as crazy as you might expect. So I've been working with David Roach as my coach for a couple of years now, who's a big believer in recovery and giving your body the ability to adapt properly to the big stimuli that are in the training schedule. But I usually don't go over about 70 miles a week, which that's pretty typical for most people doing marathons. And there are some ultra runners out there that are doing 120 to 140 miles a week. I might have one or two big weeks of 100 miles a few weeks out from an event, but generally it's about 70 miles a week, and that's also when we're talking about time spent, much less time spent than when I was doing Ironmans, and I was training, run, bike, and swim all at once.
Interesting. Yeah, I was expecting a little more volume. That's interesting. But yeah, if you show up, well trained and healthy, that'll make a pretty big difference. And I mean, if based off from what I know about you and your background, I mean, obviously you've been running for a long time, so you have a lot of that base already built into your body.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. Having that huge foundation of aerobic fitness is something that you build up over many years, and that really sticks with you. It's much slower and harder to lose that. So on top of that foundation, it's easy to build a lot more speed and higher intensity things to kind of sharpen the top of that pyramid.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I noticed obviously you've done a lot in the ultra running sport, and then triathlon too. What's kind of looking out to as the future? Like, do you have any sort of big goals? Because it seems like ultra running, really the limit is your imagination. Because people, I mean, besides doing a bunch of the big races, people can create their own events and go for FKTs. And I know you just hit a pretty major FKT that I wanted to talk about. But, what does the future look like? And any kind of major goals, or is some of that still under wraps for later?
Yeah, and that is one thing I love about ultra running, is the ability to be creative, to put your own challenges together that really align with your passions and motivate you, and that you truly enjoy. So I've done a few of those, as well as a few kind of more traditional FKTs, and that they were on routes that were already established. But I do also still enjoy races as well, and that direct head-to-head competitive element. It's just been a while now since I've done one, and likely the next one that I'll be at will hopefully be Tour de Géant this year. It's a 200-mile, 205-mile race around the Aosta Valley in the Italian Alps. And so last time I was there, I it's one of those things where I don't feel I did as well as I could have. Typically with these things, you're not going to do as well as you can the first time. So looking to take some of those lessons learned and come away with a better performance this time.
Gotcha. And let's talk about that FKT you recently accomplished. So, would you share with the audience what it was, and how long and how far it was, and et cetera?
Traditional one I actually just had this past week. I went back to the Pennine Way and got my record back on that. So you kind of mentioned at the outset that I broke a 31-year-old record on it last year. Damien Hall broke my record just a week later. So I went back last week and got that back. Lowered the time again. Pretty fun outing. But then the other one that I put together last year, the Grand Round is one of those things that again, it just gave me a lot of room to be creative, a lot of room to put together something that I was passionate about, cycling. I never enjoyed the swimming element of triathlon very much. So the Grand Round is, I took the UK's big three fell running rounds, the Paddy Buckley round in Wales, the Bob Graham round in the Lake District in England, and the Charlie Ramsey round in Scotland. And so each of these are roughly 100K running, about 24,000 or so feet of elevation gain, and they are each viewed as challenges that people try to do within 24 hours. And so my goal was to put all of them together and ride my bike in between them. And so this added about 400 miles of cycling. And so my goal was to do each of those bike legs as well in 24 hours. And so altogether, this came out to be about 400 miles of cycling, about 185 miles of running with 70-something thousand feet of elevation gain. and altogether, I ended up completing this. I actually fell a bit short of my goal on the final round, the Charlie Ramsey round in Scotland, which is just gorgeous country, but remote and wild. And we got slammed with a named windstorm during that run, and it broke me. I was kind of already at the edge, and once that hit, it crushed me, and so my pace instantly fell off a cliff, and I went from slightly ahead of schedule, 6 hours into the round, to needing 34 hours to finish it. And so all in all, I finished this adventure in 130 hours and 43 minutes, and it's still the only self-propelled connection of these 3 big UK fell running rounds.
That's insane. I mean, that's just such a massive effort on so many levels. Just very impressive. You know, I'm looking at, again, still look at I'm scrolling back and through your results there, and you've done stuff. I mean, that I think is the longest, or at least one of the longest ones, right? 130 hours is a long. I mean, how many days is that?
It's a bit over 5 days, 5 and a half.
I mean, that's a week. That's a full week of work there. You know, when you're going from a marathon to a 24-hour race to some of these multi-day stuff, is there any like major differences in mindset, or is it just kind of more of the same of you just kind of getting in your zone and kind of cruising? Because I know, like, personally, most of the OCRs kind of stop at 24 hours is the limit. And then for I've created some essentially kind of like FKT type stuff, but for OCR, essentially they're charity self-created events that have gone out to like 48 hours. But, you know, when you're going from, you know, a couple hours to 24 hours to multi-day, just kind of take me through some of your mindset there, and if it differs.
Yeah, once you kind of go past that 48-hour threshold, it's really a whole new world in terms of dealing with the sleep deprivation and the different things that you have to adapt to and learn and understand how your own body responds to those situations. As far as execution goes, just in moment to moment, it is quite similar, because on any of these things, you do the planning up front, of course, and you lay all that out. You lay out what your pace needs to be, what times you need to hit, when you might need to sleep, what you need to eat, navigation, all of these things you plan out ahead of time. But then once you actually start executing that plan, it's one piece at a time. It's always focusing on the next milestone, the next hill, the next support point, the next step. Just one small digestible chunk at a time, because if you get out there and you start to think about the entirety of what you're doing, it's overwhelming. And even if you're experienced, it seems just like an insurmountable task in front of you. So break it into manageable chunks, keep moving forward, and eventually you keep following that plan, and you'll get to the finish.
Totally, I can totally relate to all those things you said, you know, just on obviously a different scaled level there for some of my races. But, you know, one of the things you know, athletes love to talk about is, you know, gear, you know, what shoes you're wearing, what clothes you're wearing, stuff like that. So, you know, what's kind of been your kind of go-to shoes for some of these ultras the last couple of years, and clothing choices?
So I've been working with La Sportiva for a number of years now, and they focus on mountain running, which is what I focus on as well. And my main go-to shoes for them over the years has been the Akasha for kind of general purpose long distance events that aren't too technical, and then for highly technical terrain, the mutants. And so the mutants are what I mostly use at Barkely, for example, where it's very steep, lots of up and down. but just in the past year, they've come out with the Jackal, which has replaced the Akasha for me, and they've now just come out with the Cyclone, which is going to replace the Mutant for me. It's essentially a Mutant with a BOA fit adapter on it,
Mm.
like what you might have on cycling shoes. And so I'm a huge fan of that, and it lets me kind of dial things in and adjust it as my feet swell, or deal with other issues, add multiple layers of socks. Speaking of which, you mentioned Exoskin at the outset, so I've been working with them for a while now as well, and that has just been a huge advantage for me here with the bogs and the mud and the wet terrain. There's just anything you do here, you're going to end up with wet feet. And so when I did the Pennine Way last week, I had wet feet the entire time, 58 hours. I never once changed socks. I had a pair of Exo toe socks on and a pair of normal Exoskin socks over those. I wore those the entire time. They were wet the whole time. No blisters, no chafage. Also wore one of their tops and some of the new Exo underwear that you mentioned. And again, no wet pretty much the whole time with no issues for 58 hours.
Yeah, that's good tips there, especially since in our sport, in obstacle course racing, I mean, we're wet pretty much the entire time, because I mean, you'll go into a water obstacle, probably every mile at least, if not more. And for the ultra races, right? I mean, you're like that for 5, 12, 24 hours at a time. So, I think that says a lot that you're wearing some of these products for, 48 to multiple, and 48 hours and beyond, multiple day type stuff. Because, people will ask me, they're like, well, when do you change your socks during like an ultra OCR? And I was like, I don't. It's only 24 hours. Like, my feet will be fine. Like, if I've conditioned my feet through training and, training for years, stuff like that, they can hold up for 24 hours, even if they're muddy and wet. So,
yep.
You've covered a lot of distances. What would you say is either your favorite or your strongest distance, or, maybe both? What's your, if it's a different answer?
So again, the longer things are, and the steeper things are, generally the better I do, relatively speaking. So I think that my sweet spot is kind of around that 60-hour mark. I've done a few 200 milers about that distance. Just the Pennine Way was 58 hours. Barkely's about 60 hours. And so that's right. It's right at that threshold where you really start to have to deal with sleep deprivation, but you can deal with it in a more tactical way of getting power naps here and there where you need them, rather than for longer events. Typically you need some longer sleeps. Like when I did Tour de Géant, it's one issue that I ran into, is I didn't get enough sleep, and it goes a good deal farther, and you can't manage that just on power naps. And also just relative to life, about 60-hour events, that's generally the most that I can push pause on life and with my job and with my family and everything else. So that's a good distance that gets me out there. It really allows me to challenge myself, use my skills, but without being overly disruptive.
I love it. I love asking questions like that and getting an answer like that, because it just shows you how things scale to different people. Because I'll talk to someone and I'll be like, like I consider my strongest point like right around the 12-hour mark. And people are like, oh, 12 hours, that's so long. I'm like, yeah, it's not that long. But then like I talk to someone like you and you're like, yeah, it's like 60 hours is like my sweet spot. And just like, it's just funny seeing how that where you consider your sweet spot and what you consider is normal for like a human being to be able to run or operate is
yeah, it's all very relative. It wasn't all that long ago that I viewed a marathon and a 35-mile week as up there. So it is snowballs for sure. And for me, my kind of holy grail FKT that I would go after would be the Appalachian Trail. But there again, that's 42 days, and
Oof.
it's hard to push pause on life for 42 days.
Yeah, I mean, you need a job or you need to quit your job essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
What do you do? What do you do for work now?
So I'm a co-founder of a startup. It's why I moved over here to the UK for a bit to build out the team for that. So I'm the tech co-founder, and I mainly do data science and artificial intelligence and that sort of thing to assess cyber risk for companies. So essentially how much they're likely to lose due to cyber attacks on any given year.
Interesting. All right. So it sounds like, I mean, the startup you're probably super busy, but the fact that you're at the founding level, you might have some more flexibility maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's to me a bit like going back to grad school, where there are rarely times that I have to be working, so I have a good deal of flexibility in setting my own schedule, but there's also rarely times that I don't feel that I should be working. And so it's almost kind of doing these things where I'm out there and out there in the wilderness for days at a time. It's kind of a forced disconnect for me as well.
Gotcha. Also, if people are wondering where Gary is, we have lost him on the podcast. He's got no reception and the Wi-Fi isn't strong enough. He is actually out at the Infinitus 888K this week.
Oh, wow.
So he's not doing the 888K, but he's doing the 100-miler. As he said, he's like, I'm just gonna put the tip in, see how it feels. I'm pretty sure that's his test run for the 888K either next year or maybe a couple of years down the line. So do you have any interest in doing that one?
That's again one where it takes a while to find the time to be able to do something like that, and yeah, it's interesting and appealing, but there's so many things out there that I would love to do, and I kind of fell into that trap when I first moved to the UK and had all of these new European races at my doorstep. And I was like, oh, I want to do that one and that one and that one. And I did a bit too much. And I didn't perform well as a result. And so I want to, for sure, experience these different races and these different landscapes. But at the same time, I want to do it well. And I want to not sacrifice quality in the sake of quantity.
Yeah, absolutely. I know in the obstacle course racing world, we've, especially with social media, we fall into the trap of like, you always have to be like out there and racing. And there's like, sometimes brands will stack big races, like 2 weeks apart, when it's just really not good for training and performing. What is your personal, like if you do a 100-miler or a 200-miler, like how long do you want to wait? And obviously they're all different, right? Based off elevation and stuff like that. But, how long do you want to wait before your next kind of major effort? So like how often are you doing an A race per se?
So it is going to vary a good bit. Last year I had the Pennine Way and the Grand Round just 4 weeks apart, but that was dictated by the fact that I couldn't do the Pennine Way until COVID restrictions in the UK allowed for it. And I had to do the Grand Round before we kind of got into the danger zone of my wife going into labor with our child. So
Nice.
I had a short window there, and I crammed them both in and took a big long rest afterwards. This year I've got a few big plans that are spaced around 8 weeks apart, but then again with probably a nice big rest after those. So it's, I would say in a perfect world, I'd put 12 plus weeks in between each one. But if I do stack 2 or 3 of them together, it's just key to at some point get a good recovery window, because there's going to be kind of a residual effect that's going to build up and not clear out the more those get stacked on top of each other.
Gotcha. One of the things I think is interesting about ultra running is, again, there's no limits, right? Because if there's space you can run. So I think I kind of asked this already, but any kind of big goals you have for the next couple years that you're willing to share at this point, or we still keeping those under wraps?
Yeah. So I generally try not to plan much more than a year in advance. I mean, for one thing, I'd love to do races like Hard Rock, and so I'm dependent on the lottery to get into that, the same as everyone else. And so that's kind of one that you do the year your number's called. And outside of that, again, I've got Tour de Géant this year, and also looking at a big challenge here in the UK called the Wainwrights. That is links 214 summits in the Lake District. It's about 318 miles, 118,000 feet of elevation gain. The current record is 6 days, 6 hours. So I'll be quite interested in taking that on, but again, it's a matter of what I can fit into the schedule, making sure that at some point in time, if COVID restrictions come back, then I've got to have some adaptability and flexibility there. But as you mentioned, there's no shortage of things to do. I have a document of just a list of things that would be great to do that it could last me multiple lifetimes.
Yeah.
So as each year comes, we'll see what fits into the schedule and what makes sense.
Yeah, I always wonder, like when I look at some of ultra runners like you, or like growing up, it was Dean Karnazes. Kind of watching them, like what's the end state? When do you say you've had enough or done all you need to? Is it just kind of when you stop enjoying yourself, or
yeah, I think that for me, I'll reach the point where at some point, I hope not for a while, where I'll inevitably start to decline with age and no longer be kind of competing near the top of these things. You can certainly be pretty competitive in ultras well into your 50s.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose your edge. You're not gonna be going to win major races at that point in time, but you can still be pretty competitive. But at that point, my focus will shift a bit more to doing things that I enjoy, doing things that just allow me to explore and experience new areas and new people, and we'll see where my life is in terms of how much time I have to train and do other things, because as we discussed earlier, my training load's not all that high, so that's something that I see myself being able to maintain for quite a while, especially if I get to a point in life where I'm not quite as busy with work and everything else.
Gotcha. Now, I mentioned in your bio you have the Guinness World Record for fastest marathon dressed as a video game character. As a nerd, I need to ask what video game character you were dressed as.
It was Link from the Zelda
good
series.
choice. Good choice. I approve. The original Legend of Zelda for Nintendo is, I think, the best video game possibly ever. So.
Yeah, it's solid, and I grew up playing all of those, and that was a year where I had the Barkely marathons, and then 2 weeks later I had the Boston Marathon. And
Damn.
So I knew, I'm not going to set a PR here. There's no way. What can I do that would still be fun, but also kind of give me a goal to shoot for? And so I went with that, dressed up like Link. Unfortunately, so the Boston Marathon's point to point, and so some years you kind of have a headwind, some years you have a tailwind. That was unfortunately a headwind year, and that tunic was like a parachute. So
Did you have the master,
it was interesting.
You have the master sword too, and a shield, or no?
I had these little plush sword and shields.
Okay.
A sword and shield that my sister-in-law made for me specifically to meet the Boston Marathon restrictions, because
Yep.
this was just a couple of years after the bombing, and so they were pretty tight on what you could actually bring onto the course and what you could carry with you. So it was more kind of the Hylian shield and the Master dagger, maybe. But yeah, I had those and carried them the whole way.
Nice. Now, let's say there's a runner who's maybe doing 50 milers or maybe even 100 milers and is looking to go beyond, like either doing a 200 miler or maybe creating their own charity event or doing some sort of FKT. Do you have any kind of maybe one or two key pieces of advice that you would give to someone who's kind of in that position?
Yeah, well, put yourself in the mindset, and even simple things in everyday life. Put yourself in situations where you're likely to fail. See how you respond to that. Practice pushing through that. Practice pushing through those low moments. And that's one of the biggest things for me as you get to these super long events is, at more reasonable distances, at marathons and shorter. I often say the half marathon is the longest reasonable distance for anyone to run. And at races like that, you start off and pretty much the entirety of the race, your level of fatigue is increasing, and you're trying to time it to where you hit the finish line right as your fatigue tops out and you have nothing left. And so it's just this constant gradual decline, whereas you get to these longer events and you have a decline and it seems like you're done and there's nothing left and there's no way you can move forward, and then boom, you break through it and you have another high, and there are all of these peaks and valleys throughout, and so it was something I was told when I started out was it doesn't always get worse, and so that's important to remember, that you're gonna hit low points, but that doesn't mean it's going to keep getting worse. You can push through those. You can get to the other side, and it's pretty awesome when you do, and very rewarding.
I like that. That's really good. And you mentioned it a little bit just now, but I'm looking at still scrolling through your bio here. You have a bunch of DNFs actually mixed in there. So what's your what advice would you give to someone who maybe recently DNF'd, and how do you kind of bounce back from that?
Learn from it, and I've always kind of jumped in the deep end with signed up for that first marathon when I hadn't raced longer than 10K. The first triathlon I signed up for was an Ironman. I did Barkely quite early on in my ultra career, and so to me there's no better preparation. If you have an A goal and it's a specific event or a specific race, there's no better preparation for succeeding at that than trying and failing the first time. You could go do a shorter, smaller race and succeed, and that would help, but it wouldn't help as much as just going for it and failing. Of course, within the bounds of safety. Don't do something that you're not physically prepared for, or you're not experienced in terms of survival situations. Definitely don't do that. Give yourself big goals and don't be afraid of failing. And oftentimes that failure is the shortest route to success.
That's a good one. I like it. As someone who's done a lot of these super long races, how do you differentiate between I'm going to DNF because now I'm at serious risk, or I've come in seriously unprepared, versus maybe I'm just feeling a little bit off and I'm in a low moment that you were talking about. How do you kind of tell those apart if you can?
So that definitely comes with experience, and it also comes with asking yourself, honestly, what's worth it when you're out there? And sometimes, are you still learning? Are you still having fun? Are you still in pursuit of a big goal that will be rewarding when you reach the finish line? Or are you just miserable and the finish no longer carries any meaning for you, and you're not having fun? And sometimes that happens, and you know, at that point, I've called it before, where, you know, that happened to me. And when I returned to Barkely, and I was in the lead of the race, and I was kind of cursed with the knowledge of what the last two loops would require of me. And I knew that I didn't have it on that day. And so I cut my losses, and so that I could prepare for the next big thing, and got much more out of that than putting myself in a big hole that would have taken a while to dig out of.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Good. Another good answer. Yeah. I'm loving picking your brain here. A lot of good material here. I want to be respectful of your time and start wrap things up. Before we get to that, though, you know, like I said at the beginning, we try to pull lessons learned from other sports and apply them to obstacle course racing. You know, so what kind of lessons can we pull from ultra running that can apply to obstacle course racing? Whether it be just, you know, kind of in pursuit of goals or something more sport specific, related to like endurance performance. Just kind of open it up to you.
I'd say to always remember why you're doing this thing in the first place, you know, and I think this applies. You know, I do a lot of the big challenges and big adventures I do because it allows me to explore my strengths and weaknesses. It allows me to push my limits. It allows me to overall become a better person in all areas of life, not just running. But I choose to do those big challenges and big goals in ultra running because it's something that I enjoyed in the first place. I enjoy running. I enjoy trails. I enjoy the mountains. And so it's a way of setting these big goals in an area that I enjoy. And so if you're doing OCR, I feel it's the same thing. Set those big challenges and set those big goals, but remember, you wanted to do that as part of OCR because you enjoy it, and it's an activity you enjoy, and the entire time you're out there, you should be taking that in and be remembering that you know, it's an experience that you get to do and that you chose to do.
Good stuff there. Now, before we let you go, you know, tell us one thing people would be surprised to know about you. And again, it could be fitness related, or we usually prefer not fitness related. The more random, the better. But yeah.
I can't whistle. I can't roll my R's, and I can't get brain freezes. That last one is kind of my superpower.
That's
you know, any ice cream eating contest, I will I will crush that.
That's interesting. So I can't whistle either. I used to be able to whistle when I was younger, and now I somehow lost it. So I can roll my R's, and I can definitely get brain freezes, and they're terrible. So you're really not missing out on anything there. So
yeah, it's one of those things. I figure, you know, I should experience it once just to know what everyone's talking about. But I've tried. I've downed Wendy's Frosties, those big Route 44 slushies at Sonic, just as fast as you can, and nothing. Got nothing.
All right, interesting. You know, final shout outs you want to give, friends, family, sponsors, any other brands we need to plug that have been supporting you, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned family there, and for me, that's another key thing to remember going out and doing these long events and the training associated with it, is just having the family involved, and a part of that is huge, and I'm very fortunate to have a supportive wife and kids and doing these things, and hope that I can pass on some of these passions to my kids through this.
Nice, good stuff. And for our listeners, again, you can head over to teamstrengthspeed.com, to our website. We just have a new order of Bleg mitts coming in. Those are the neoprene mittens that people have been using for obstacle course racing. So we've got the extremes in, the 3mm ones in small, medium, and large. And the lights we have mediums, and small and large should be in any day now. So for anyone's interested in that, you can head over to our online store. And then my books on obstacle course racing are all available over at teamstrengthspeed.com. I just redesigned part of the website to highlight some of the work me and Bobby Ross have been doing for our upcoming documentary. And if anyone's interested in reading more about, if any of our Ultra Runner listeners are interested in more about ultra-ocr, so I have two books on there that would be interesting for you. So one is the Mud Run Guide Ultra-ocr Bible. So that's more of a training book, taking you from distances 5 to 24 hours in length, and some training plans and tips and techniques and stuff like that. And then if you're more interested in narrative, personal story, my biography is up there, Ultra-ocr Man, from Special Forces soldier to record-setting professional obstacle course racer. Again, available in digital, hard copy, and audiobook off Audible. So again, all those links over at teamstrengthspeed.com. John, thanks again for joining us. Really enjoyed this. Just a ton of good information in there, and I hope our listeners really take a lot of this to heart and apply it to their own training and racing. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, we'll catch up with you later, and keep crushing it. And looking forward to following you and seeing what else you have coming the rest of the year and over the next couple of years.
Thanks very much.
All right, talk to you later.